I'm Natasha Kirchak, and this is Middle East Now. Here are today's headlines.
Northern Israel is on fire as Hezbollah launches the largest barrage of rockets at Haifa since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. And major Arab leaders are set to gather in Saudi Arabia for an emergency summit on how to de-escalate tensions in the region. Plus, Iraq is set to lower the age of consent for marriage for girls to just 9 years old, along with a shocking slate of legislation aimed at curbing women's rights. We have the details.
It has been a fiery day in northern Israel as the fighting continues with Hezbollah. The terror group has fired the largest barrage of rockets at Haifa since October 8th of 2023. 90 rockets within just minutes, and the IDF says in the first round of 80 rockets, most were shot down by air defenses. But as you can see in these visuals, several struck inside towns, causing damage to both homes and to cars. A 52-year-old man has been moderately wounded by shrapnel, along with several others who have also been injured. And joining us now from northern Israel is our correspondent, Zach Anders. Zach, you have been at the scene of one of the sites of damage today for a couple of hours now. What is the latest, and how much rocket fire have we seen in total from Hezbollah throughout the day?
Well, a staggering amount compared to yesterday. More than 190 rockets, the IDF tells me today, into northern Israel. That's a big jump from yesterday's 45. And we were lulled into a bit of a period here where we thought that maybe the rocket attacks, they were getting less and less substantial. These volleys seemed to be, as you were looking at some of these numbers on a spreadsheet, it seemed like things were getting, the attacks as a whole were getting smaller and smaller. But we see today, Hezbollah still has their capabilities to fire some 80 rockets at a time into the same area. Here in Kiryat Atta, we know that one person was wounded as a result of the shrapnel here. The fire to this home continued to burn for hours. It was a remarkable scene here. The crowd in this town, on this street, combating with police at one point while the fire's still burning to try and get past this roadblock and go to their homes themselves. One woman had to be taken away by ambulance after a confrontation with police, totally unrelated to the rocket strikes, and she's going to the hospital. We know that 7 people have been wounded today here in the north. Yesterday, even though there was 45 rockets, there were still 6 people wounded in yesterday's attacks. 7 today. It sounds like none very seriously, although there will be a long path to recovery for some of these injuries, it sounds like, but nothing that's going to be life-threatening. It's an incredible scene here, knowing how much effort and resources, energy goes into just one successful direct hit. That's what this was, a direct hit into this house. You still see the smoke burning. This is going to smolder for a long time. And that's kind of the question we have, is how long is this conflict going to continue to burn at this pace? We know that the frontline situation is having great success with IDF ground forces continuing to move. Last night we heard the IDF chief of staff reportedly tell command here in the north that an approval was given by the IDF for an expansion of the ground campaign if it comes to that. Now it's up to the politicians to decide where it goes from here. And on the political front, we're getting conflicting messages. We're getting the new defense minister stating somewhat tantamount to Hezbollah has been mostly defeated, mostly eliminated, but at the same time, knowing that Hezbollah has the capacity to fire 80 rockets at a time, 190 rockets today, really begs the question, is this conflict close to its end when we know Hezbollah is still out there posing as major of a threat as it does? 6 people wounded yesterday, 7 again today. We'll see what tomorrow brings.
All right, that's our correspondent, Zach Anders, joining us from the scene of one of the rocket impacts in northern Israel. Now, even though the IDF is continuing its operation in Lebanon on the ground and via the air, the new defense minister has stated that Hezbollah has been defeated. Yet, despite these claims, northern Israel, as you just saw, is seeing an uptick in rocket fire from the terror group. Arlene Plachmeyer has the story.
The new Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, has declared the Lebanese terror group Hezbollah defeated.
We defeated Hezbollah, and the elimination of Nasrallah was the crowning achievement. Now it is our job to continue the pressure, and here we will work together to materialize the fruits of this victory by ensuring that the security situation in Lebanon has changed.
Despite Katz's claims, the IDF operation in Lebanon pushes on. On Sunday, the IDF released a video showing a network of tunnels, rooms and stored weapons underneath a cemetery, which it filled with concrete later. The IDF have been targeting Hezbollah fighters deeper into Lebanon, with the latest strike north of Beirut on the village of Al-Mat, which killed at least 23 people on Sunday. Despite Trump's promises to make an end to the war in Lebanon and Gaza, the Lebanese people are skeptical about his statements.
All the talk we hear in the press and the media. I checked with some of the responsible brothers, especially in the Lebanese state. I confided with them about some issues before this conference, so we know what to say regarding this, and they said that until now there is communications at the international level. Yes, we all heard about it in the media, but Lebanon has not received anything official or any specific proposals.
But Hezbollah is not the only group along Israel's northern border that is currently involved in the war. Overnight, the IDF downed 4 drones coming from Iraq, which was later claimed by the pro-Iranian militia, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. Meanwhile, Saudi media reported on Sunday that a Hezbollah commander responsible for the 2005 assassination of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri was killed in an alleged Israeli airstrike in Syria. Salim Yamil Ayash had a 10 million reward from Washington on his head and was a senior member of Hezbollah's Unit 151 assassination squad. And so, despite Katz's claims that Hezbollah has been defeated, the war in the north still remains active on many different fronts.
Well, joining us now in the studio is former member of the Knesset, Ruth Wasserman-Lande, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran. So I think the first question that many of our viewers have is just how significant Hezbollah's weapons arsenal actually is at this point. Obviously, under Defense Minister Gallant, we heard the number 80% of the weapons arsenal had been destroyed through IDF operations. But we are obviously seeing an uptick in attacks, and also there's no kind of clear information as to what weapons remain in that arsenal. How many ballistic missiles have been fired, for example? I mean, Ariel, could you give us some insight as to what we know about the strength of the terror group at this point?
Well, this is all based on statements by Israeli political leaders.
Right.
But the figure 20% of their arsenal remains, that was in reference to their medium and short range rockets. That does not include their ballistic missiles, their long range rockets, their precision rockets. So it's what's called nitpicking the details. And that's not to say that Hezbollah's arsenal and launch capabilities have been severely degraded, but they still have the capabilities. We just saw today, as you mentioned, the largest single barrage to the Haifa area since the start of the war. What we are seeing in recent days is they're decreasing the number of rockets that they fire on a whole and on a daily basis. But we see that they're going further south. A lot of these impacts are more precise, and so we're seeing a shift in the firepower use of Hezbollah.
And also strategy as well, right, in terms of how they carry out these attacks. I understand that specifically with this barrage, I mean, there was an attempt to kind of confuse Israel's air defense system, right?
So by using the swarming tactic of rather than 10, 15 rockets that Israel's air defenses can tackle them with high levels of success, at least statistically in the past that has been the case. Now with a barrage of 85 rockets in a single launch, that strains Israel's air defense capabilities. And in fact, that is the strategy that we also see used by Iran, for instance, in their 2 attacks, missile attacks on Israel, sending a large amount of projectiles to overdo the Israeli air defense systems. So we're seeing fewer strikes by Hezbollah on a daily basis, but each strike is more calculated and in often cases, at least in recent days, causing more damage and also further south.
So, I spoke with various Arab analysts regarding why we saw such a major barrage of rocket fire today specifically. Some said it was in response to messaging from the new Israeli defense minister that Hezbollah has been defeated. Perhaps this was a message to say that, wait a second, look at our capabilities. We still have the ability to cause damage. The question is, at this point, what the Israeli public thinks about the responsibility of its leadership following this change, obviously, in military leadership amidst the war, and also the fact that we're still seeing these capabilities as far as Haifa, which is really just an hour from where we are right now. This was not on the border of Lebanon.
So let's begin with the fact that we always take into consideration that we are up against a logical player. And yes, they have their logic. The only thing is that the logic is different. So the terrorist group, the Hezbollah, a designated terrorist group, have their own logic, and their logic is very much based on the ideologic presumption, the inherent understanding that what they seek is the exhaustion, the fatigue of Israel for the purpose of allowing Iran or the Islamic Republic of Iran to get to their own objectives. And their own objectives is getting to Jerusalem and actually defeating the Israeli Defense Forces. This needs to be understood in order to attempt to comprehend what the Hezbollah is trying to do. And they will continue because their honor or their mechanism of exhausting Israel is very much part of the plan, given what the Israelis have done to defeat their 80%, 70%, doesn't matter how many percent of their capabilities. And the IDF has been successful, but they have not understood that their raison d'etre is to make Israel exhausted, both within the society, amidst the public, and the public is exhausted. They do not understand why the government is speaking about any kind of a ceasefire, given this barrage of rockets, and to prepare the ground for any kind of attack by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And they're not going anywhere. They have time.
Yeah, I totally agree with Ruth that the primary goal is a war of attrition. So they're not in this for the short run. They want to drag this on as long as they can. Now, the real question, specifically this barrage and other barrages, are how many of them are launched from south of the Litani River and how much are from north of the Litani River? Because we know that currently Hezbollah maintains launch capabilities in both areas, but according to the deal that is reportedly circulating between Israel, Lebanon, Hezbollah, and the mediators, Hezbollah has 60 days to remove its positions from south of the Litani River, regroup there, and it's up to the Lebanese military to dismantle that. So now you have the question, after this deal, let's say, is in place and Hezbollah is not south of the Litani, what happens when they launch at Israel north of the Litani? Because it's up to them to decide whether they violate an agreement or not. That has been the reality since 2006 on Israel's northern border.
So if I may, just another word, they will not stand by any agreement. That's absolutely undeniable. So should the Israeli IDF hit them harder before they come to some kind of an agreement, because an agreement needs to be reached at some point. But why now? Why? Because there's no pressure?
For Israel, I mean, at the end of the day, the question is whether or not this deal on the table will allow them to intervene if, of course, Hezbollah does not adhere to the rules of whatever resolution is passed. But it needs
to be understood they will not adhere to any of the agreements that will be signed.
Well, history has certainly set that precedent. All right, we're going to turn right now to Saudi Arabia, which is set to host a major Arab Islamic summit aimed at addressing how to de-escalate rising tensions in the region. The summit is expected to see the participation of major Arab leaders, and it's going to reportedly discuss, quote, brutal Israeli aggression in the Palestinian territories and Lebanon. Our Ariel Osran has the details.
With ceasefire talks stalled, the IDF continues to deepen its ground operation in the Gaza Strip. In northern Gaza, the troops eliminated dozens of terrorists and dismantled terror infrastructure, including underground sites in Jabalia and Beit Lahia, the IDF said. In southern Gaza's Rafah, Israeli forces uncovered a weapons storage facility located near a mosque and a hospital. The IDF announced another expansion of the humanitarian area in an effort to mitigate the ongoing crisis in Gaza.
We are progressing with great intensity. The fact that you are concluding 3 weeks here with approximately 1,000 terrorists killed and 1,000 terrorists captured is a significant achievement that deals Hamas a severe blow.
With no end in sight to the fighting in Gaza and the war in Lebanon still ongoing, Arab and Muslim leaders convened in Saudi Arabia on Monday in a call to end the wars in the Middle East.
We demand the suspension of Israel's membership in the United Nations until it adheres to international law and ends its crimes against the Palestinian people. The Arab, Islamic, humanitarian, and moral duty requires us to show the highest levels of solidarity and to sever diplomatic ties with Israel rather than seek normalization.
The Saudi host, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, strongly condemned Israel and for the first time publicly accused it of committing genocide in Gaza.
We call on the international community to uphold its responsibility to maintain international peace and security by immediately ending the Israeli aggression against our brothers in Palestine and Lebanon.
Such statements further undermine Israeli hopes for normalization with Saudi Arabia, something that Riyadh says is off the table, at least until the war in Gaza is over.
Well, joining us now is Jonathan Schanzer, the Senior Vice President for Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Why is this meeting happening today, and what can we actually expect out of it?
Well, I think the first thing we need to note is that there is a lot of virtue signaling coming out of the Arab world. Countries like Saudi Arabia, probably also the UAE, Bahrain, others. I think it's fair to say now that they don't see the Palestinian issue as their core national interest. That's why we saw the wave of normalization that we did back in 2020. That said, I think that the photos and the reports coming out of Gaza, perhaps Lebanon as well, are forcing some of these governments to hedge a bit. I think this may be the last time we hear such emphatic statements coming out of the Arab world as Donald Trump is set to retake the White House. When he does that, I think we can expect the Saudis to be back in close discussion with the incoming administration about a possible normalization deal.
Right. That actually leads to my next question. I mean, what message does this truly send us about Saudi Arabia's willingness to normalize ties with Israel down the line, especially knowing that Trump is set to be sworn in as the next president of the United States? I mean, you're essentially suggesting that right now there's no fear to really make more aggressive statements because he isn't yet leading the country. But obviously, Trump is watching closely to kind of see the reaction of Arab leaders just prior to, oh, look at that. Hold on a second. These are live visuals in the north of Israel of rockets being fired from Lebanon. That seems to be the Iron Dome in action. What you're seeing right now are live visuals of a rocket attack on Israel. This is in the north of the country. Does our control room know which area this is, what we're seeing here? All right. Okay, we're going to go back to our guest. Sorry. So basically, Saudi Arabia, you know, how worried are they about Trump's leadership and what that essentially means for the future of any major security deals with the U.S.?
Look, I mean, the first thing we need to acknowledge is that normalization is a process, not an event. And I believe that the Saudis have already normalized. They're already having discussions with the Israelis quietly. The question is, can we draw them out into the public and to acknowledge their relationship with Israel? I think that's what's on the table. Right now, there's no cost for the Saudis to dig in and to declare their antipathy toward Israel or their alarm or their hostility about what's been going on in Gaza or what's been going on in Lebanon. Never mind that the Israelis are defending themselves. This is playing well in the Arab street, and perhaps it's playing well in Saudi Arabia itself. But I think there's no cost for doing it now. In about 2.5 months, there may be more cost. And it's at that point that I suspect the Saudis will begin to dial back some of this rhetoric. It doesn't mean that they're going to make an agreement the following day, but I do believe that we'll likely see the softening of some of that rhetoric. And I think that'll be aided in part by efforts, whether by the Biden administration or the incoming Trump administration, to bring this war to an end. When the war ends, it'll be a lot easier to engage in this process more openly.
All right. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, Jonathan Chancer from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Now, with Donald Trump slated to become the 47th president of the U.S. in January, several of the Israeli government's most far-right leaders are celebrating what they think will now be a chance for Israel to apply sovereignty to the settlements in the West Bank. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, for his part, says he's already begun instructing the Settlement Directorate of the Defense Ministry and the Civil Administration to begin preparing the groundwork for applying sovereignty, citing Trump's first term as president as proof that Israel steps away from, quote, removing the danger of a Palestinian state. So, what will a Trump presidency mean for the future of a two-state solution? How are the Palestinians reacting to this rhetoric? Well, joining us now is Dr. Harel Horev, the head of the Middle Eastern Network Analysis Desk at Tel Aviv University. So, should Israel's far-right leadership be celebrating this early? Trump has made it clear he does support a two-state solution and that he plans to pursue his deal of the century to bring about peace.
Well, knowing what Trump almost achieved in his last term, I'm quite encouraged. The issue was Abu Mazen, was and remained. It's still unpublished. We know very few details about it, but I can tell you from talks that I had with the previous and the forthcoming administration of Trump, and of course verifying it with my Palestinian sources, we were very close at that term around the century deal. There was a proposal, a realistic one, that as some of my Palestinian colleagues defined, a historical mistake by Abu Mazen to not accept it. I think this time, even without knowing the exact details, I think this time it would be harder, giving, of course, October 7 and everything that went through, and the fact that Trump is in his second term, which can make him basically much more aggressive and pushy about his ideas. I think it would be far harder for them to refuse to such a deal. And as I said, from what I've heard, without even knowing really the full details of it, just the fact that it was a proposal that was absolutely realistic for both sides, I'm more encouraged that this doesn't necessarily mean bad news for the Israelis, although, of course, I think that we will need to see that the multiple details involved in this proposal are still in coordinates with the Israeli interest, given, of course, what happened in October 7, namely security and the rest of the things that are important.
How has Palestinian leadership reacted to Trump's win and the appointments that he's been making so far in his incoming government?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, nothing from Hamas at the moment, besides some, I guess, curses and all sorts of unflattering definitions. Regarding the PA, even without hearing them specifically, I think they're very cautious at the moment. Obviously, they preferred the Democrats. But because, you know, their experience with Trump, or more likely the experience of Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, and Trump was not good. However, things have changed, and I'm pretty sure they are aware of it. The question is whether they will be able to stand firm in their refusal or to try another way.
All right, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us with your insight. I'm going to turn back to our guest really quickly for some insight on this. You know, Ruth, I saw that you were nodding.
Well, it depends. I was quite astounded to hear that, first of all, the Saudis, what they had done, and the fact that they are holding the conference that they are holding at the moment, just to put that behind us, in my humble opinion, that's trying to show to the Arab world that they are indeed, let's say, committed to the Palestinian cause, to the Muslim cause, to the Arab cause. And that's a minute before they normalize relations with Israel as Trump comes into power. That's my humble analysis of the issue.
Okay.
In fact, they're trying to show that they're holier than the Pope, to see what can be done. And obviously, they are awaiting, they're preparing the ground for the incoming presidency of Donald Trump. Regarding what is happening in the West Bank, I think that this will be a much longer way than has been said in the previous commentary. In my humble opinion, it needs to be seen, but it won't be as easy as has been suggested, or perhaps I didn't understand, because the thought of not creating a Palestinian state and that being taken away off the table, even as a concept, during Donald Trump's administration,
right,
while he wants the Saudis on board to normalize relations, something doesn't add up.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we are going to be going out for a quick commercial break. I'd like to thank our guests for sticking with us. We'll be back shortly. Don't go anywhere. We have a lot coming up, and trust me, you're not going to want to miss it.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
3, 2, 1, Go!
We know Ben Cumberland is solid at cutting here on the underhand chop. Look at Cody Steers go. Wow, that's that Australian style. Quick, moving over to the second side. 1.5 strokes ahead of Ben Cumberland. Ben Cumberland got a bit of a sticky axe on his second driver there. And he is right there. His hands ambidextrous style onto that second side. Jack Jordan doing the same thing on the other side. Jack Jordan might get this one.
And we are back on Middle East now. I'm Natasha Kirchek, and thanks for sticking with us. Well, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has just confirmed that he will be appointing New York Representative Elise Stefanik as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Now, the 40-year-old Republican from upstate New York is known for having helped force out 2 Ivy League college presidents after her sharp questioning on anti-Semitism on university campuses across the United States. So Israelis are certainly looking forward to seeing how she's going to address anti-Israel bias within the UN. And Arab member states are likely going to be following her next steps very closely. This comes as Iran is calling on the UN to expel Israel following a deadly strike in Syria targeting the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah. And joining us now from Washington, D.C. is our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. So, Mike, what can we expect out of Elise Stefanik when it comes to addressing the United Nations handling of the ongoing war between Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, and, of course, Iran and its proxies?
Nikki Haley 2.0 is what to expect out of Elise Stefanik. She's been incredibly critical of the global body for its anti-Israel bias, for its bowing down to anti-U.S. and anti-Western interest, and, as you mentioned, a leader on anti-Semitism here in the U.S. The grilling of those 3 elite university presidents from Harvard, MIT, and Penn made national news when they all said, in response to her question about whether chanting for the genocide of Jews qualifies as anti-Semitism under their university policies, they all responded that, well, it's all based on the context. 2 of those university presidents were gone in the immediate aftermath. Another one did not the long term, and Stefanik has been held up as a champion of American Judaism since that point. So this is definitely a win for Israel, a win for American Jewry when it comes to the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. I think the question is this point is, can the American relationship, not the Israeli relationship, can the American relationship with the UN survive Elise Stefanik going forward here? There's going to be, I think, a reckoning in that relationship in the months and years to come.
Now, Iran is calling to expel Israel from the United Nations. What can we actually expect out of this?
It's bluster, but keep in mind, while putting that issue to the side, as well it should be, there is an effort to unseat Israel at the United Nations, and it's coming right now from the Palestinians. There's a scheme, a plot being hatched to go to what's called the Credentials Committee coming up in December. The Credentials Committee is the committee that actually oversees validating each individual country's credentials, and it's usually just a process of protocol. There's very, very little controversy that goes into those things, maybe with a change of government, if there's a coup and they don't immediately recognize the government. That's where it usually comes down to the Credentials Committee. But the Palestinians want the Credentials Committee to pull the credentials of Israel. Of course, it could happen in theory, but American leadership, especially on the Republican side, is making it quite clear to the United Nations, if they don't fight that tooth and nail and that actually comes to fruition or anything close to it, well, you can say bye-bye to U.S. funding for the UN, and without U.S. funding for the UN essentially ceases to exist. I think in the end there will be enough pressure on the Palestinians to pull back on that, but at this point in time, anything is up in the air the way things go right now in terms of Israel's standing at the UN, but there's something to watch here coming up next month.
All right, Mike Wagenheim, our senior U.S. correspondent, thank you for that update. We're going to be turning now to another issue related to the United States. The U.S. is set to decide this week whether Israel has made progress towards improving the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip and how the White House is going to end up responding to whatever ruling is made. Now, back on October 13th, the Biden administration sent Israeli officials a letter saying that Israel must take urgent steps within 30 days to ease the conditions in the enclave or risk facing heavier restrictions on American military aid. Well, the U.S. deadline is set to expire just days after global food security experts said that there's a, quote, strong likelihood that famine is imminent in areas of northern Gaza. This as Israel continues to root out Hamas militants in the area. Well, joining us back in the studio is former member of the Knesset Ruth Wasserman Landau and our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran. Okay, so first of all, what measures is the U.S. actually expecting Israel to take to ease the conditions in Gaza? And can we expect the American government to be satisfied with Israel over the course of the last month?
So this is a complex situation. First of all, we have tons and tons of humanitarian aid going into the Gaza Strip. A lot of that humanitarian aid is not being collected by the distributing factors, the international bodies that are, or relief organizations that are in charge of actually distributing this humanitarian aid. Many, many hundreds of tons of humanitarian aid. Other parts of this humanitarian aid is being stolen, and God forbid any civilian comes near that humanitarian aid, terrible things happen to them by the Hamas operatives that remain on the ground and actually conduct what is happening there in the void of any other regime or managing factor. And what is happening is that a lot of people are not receiving this humanitarian aid because of the Hamas and because of the lack of distribution. So this is a sticky point because the IDF does not want to actually deliver and distribute the humanitarian aid itself. It needs another body or wants another body to do it for them. And this is not happening fast enough in the right amounts in order to appease the American administration in the manner that they want.
Now, well, Ariel, I want to ask you, I mean, have we seen any changes in how Israel has been attempting to perhaps control or deal with also the just general unlawlessness that the Strip is seeing? What have they actually been doing in terms of changing the ongoing situation on the ground?
The situation on the ground, the reality that Ruth described, is very challenging to do that without having any sort of local administration to work with to facilitate these changes. But if we're looking at not only that the aid is going in, but it's not going in as much as it would like, and it doesn't get to where it needs to get, and a lot of it is stolen. There's other instances, examples of how Hamas is cynically taking advantage of its suffering population to continue to establish its own rule wherever it is. Just for example, the IDF sharing a short while ago an incident of a convoy, not of humanitarian aid, but of displaced Gazans, a convoy that their facility, that their safe travel was facilitated with Israeli forces, but the forces found in that convoy, following suspicious activity, they found that there were weapons that were transferred in that convoy. I think we have an image of bullets that were smuggled through this convoy. And this is just one example from one incident that goes on a daily basis of Hamas. Here, this is the image. This is a convoy that was supposed to be for humanitarian purposes and was to facilitate the movement of displaced Gazans. But this shows how time and time again Hamas cynically uses the hardship of its population in order to continue and establish its rule in places where Israeli forces have hurt its military.
But even
standing.
in knowing this, I mean, obviously the bottom line is that civilians on the ground are suffering the most, no matter whose fault it ultimately is. So what is actually being done to ease the situation? And are we going to find the U.S. essentially come to some type of decision to now limit military aid to Israel because not enough is actually being done to address this? How bad is the situation in Gaza at this point?
So we need to understand Gaza, the Gazan Strip, there is the northern part of the Gazan Strip, which is the closest to the Israeli border. That part, the IDF is attempting to have the civilians move out safely, and it is attempting to facilitate that safe passage of the civilians from the north to the south of Gaza in order to have just the warriors, the terrorist Hamas operatives that remain to fight with and to clean up what is happening. At the same time, what is happening is that the money stolen by the Hamas, or rather the humanitarian aid stolen by the Hamas, is being sold to the very population that is supposed to get this humanitarian aid for free, for exorbitant amounts. And this is the money that is being used to recruit youngsters for the Hamas lines. They're not as well trained as the former operatives, but there's still a continuous recruitment to the Hamas because of this money. There's no other funding that is being used by the Hamas. So it's almost a double-edged sword. At the same time, the south of the Gaza Strip is where the masses of the civilians are in poor conditions. There's a lot of humanitarian aid going in there, a lot of vaccinations that the Israelis facilitated for the children and so on, for polio and whatnot. But because there's no legal holding or a vacuum of leadership, because the Hamas has been weakened, and who remains? The vagabonds, the outlaws, the bullies. And what they do to the civilian population in the south of Israel, with the lack of a different kind of a civilian leadership, is absolutely awful in the south of the Gaza Strip. Yes.
Right. Okay. So just very, very quick answer here, Ariel. What do we think the U.S. is going to find ultimately at this point? Are we going to see U.S. military aid cut off to Israel or cut down as a result of the findings? Well,
I think the American administration called for added efforts to bring in humanitarian aid. We are seeing that on the Israeli side. What the Biden administration said it wants to see is results. They want to see an increase or return to pre-October, November numbers. I don't know if, even if it doesn't reach exactly that, if Israel shows that there is positive movement to reach that, that might appease them. But at the end of the day, we're talking about the twilight hours or weeks of the Biden administration, and I doubt they'll take out any substantial action against Israel.
This is a very dangerous timing in the administration, the lame duck period. They can do a lot to either help or hurt the Israeli situation. And I wouldn't, I mean, the situation is very sticky and a very difficult one, given the lack of and the vacuum in the leadership in the Gaza Strip.
All right, well, we're going to be moving on to a different topic right now. Thousands of credit card readers across Israel malfunctioned yesterday, leaving businesses in absolute limbo, along with personal banking apps, and what is believed to be yet another cyber attack engineered by an Iran-linked hacking group. Now, the incident comes less than 2 weeks after a similar attack downed a different credit card company for a period of a few hours. And joining us now is Professor Ariel Evans, the CEO of RiskQ.
I'm not hearing her.
Now, can you hear me now? Ariel?
I am not hearing. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Ariel can hear us now. Okay, so yesterday, the disruptions to credit card systems left tons of local businesses in a craze here in Israel, unable to charge clients. I mean, this begs the question as to how many companies are at risk of being hacked right now across Israel, and how big of a threat this is to the country.
Well, every single company is at risk for being attacked like this. This type of attack is a business interruption, and if they can't get you with missiles, rockets, and drones, they're going to try to get you economically with disrupting your business. So we all have to be ready to be able to restore all of our systems as quickly as we possibly can to prevent any type of financial damage.
Who do Israeli authorities think are behind these cyber attacks, and what is actually being done to address them at this point?
Well, most likely the Iranians, because the Iranians actually are, our most favorite enemy at this point. It could be proxies that they're hiring, just like they do when they work with the Yemens or with the Hezbollah. So it could be also people that they're hiring to do this as well.
Now, obviously, Israel needs to take a concerted measure to help protect some of these companies. Obviously, when it trickles down to local businesses, restaurants, for example, yesterday that were unable to charge clients and, experienced economic losses as a result of this, they have no concerted action that they can take other than depend on these companies. So how is Israel planning to address this?
Well, any business that's planning to address this needs to understand what would be the recovery process for that happening. They need to consult with, if they're being hosted, their internet service provider or their application provider, and ask them what is the recovery plan for them to be able to recover within a very short period of time so they can be able to actually collect the cash from the customers. It shouldn't be too difficult. However, if they do a large distributed denial of service attack across many, many businesses, that's when it gets a little messy, because they're going to have to try and recover all of them as quickly as possible, and that's could be difficult. So I would suggest that every retailer reach out to whoever's providing their IT services, whether it's a IT service provider or an application service provider, and ask them, what is the recovery plan? What do we do? How quickly can we be back up and running?
All right, Ariel Evans, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, giving us some insight on this. We're going to be turning now to politics, the political situation here in Israel, and of course, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's latest corruption cases. His legal team has now filed a request with the Jerusalem District Court seeking to delay his testimony on charges of fraud, breach of trust, and bribery. But this request is sure to be met with petitions for the Prime Minister to recuse himself from office, contradicting his claim to the courts that he would be able to perform his duties while on trial. Take a look.
Charged with fraud, breaches of trust, and bribery almost 5 years ago, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has yet to take the stand to testify in his own defense, though he has appeared in court on a handful of occasions. When the indictments were made, Netanyahu refused to resign, claiming he could stand trial and continue to be the country's leader. But in an expected twist, the Prime Minister's legal team has petitioned the Jerusalem District Court to postpone his testimony in his corruption trial by 2.5 months. Government monitoring groups could possibly petition for the High Court to force the Prime Minister to resign from office, a move that would be encouraged by opposition leaders.
Netanyahu is unfit. He cannot lead Israel during a war. Our fighting soldiers cannot trust him. The citizens of Israel cannot trust him.
The request for delay was widely expected on the grounds that the Prime Minister cannot face trial in the court at this time because it lacks a safe room, and that the ongoing war prohibits Netanyahu from sufficiently preparing, adding that this, quote, small delay will enable the defense to properly prepare for his testimony and won't harm the public interest. In a series of posts on X following the investigations into the Prime Minister's office relating to leaks of classified intelligence documents, Netanyahu's son has accused the Shin Bet of trying to overthrow his father's government. Referring to the corruption charges for which the Prime Minister is on trial, he calls the probes
blood libel and gaslighting designed to hide from the public the deliberations of the junta on the night of October 7th that excluded the Prime Minister.
The trial has faced criticism over the slow pace of proceedings, and while Netanyahu is scheduled to begin testifying on December 2nd as things stand, the proceedings have been seen as unlikely to end within the next few years.
Now, this next story is just so disturbing. Iraq is poised to slash the legal age of consent from 18 to 9 years old, allowing men to marry little girls. This is a proposed legislation that is going to also deprive women of the right to divorce, seek custody of their children, and also inherit money. Iraq's parliament is currently dominated by a coalition of conservative Shia Muslim parties who say that the move aligns with a strict interpretation of Islamic law and is, quote, intended to protect young girls from immoral relationships. Well, experts and activists say the amended legislation will effectively erase the most important rights of women in the country, where, according to the UN, almost 30% of girls are already being married under the age of 18 thanks to legal loopholes. Well, joining us now is a former spokesperson of the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq, that's Entifad Kanbar. So, Entifad, tell us more about this legislation and the impact that it's going to have on Iraqi women. You know, like I mentioned before, Iraq already has a high rate of child marriage. Around 28% of women in Iraq are married by 18, which is not even legal.
Well, Natasha, needless to say, I completely and vehemently condemn this resolution. It's against any civilized country. But this is a country now, Iraq now is not a democracy. Iraq now becoming increasingly as a theocracy. Believe it or not, in 1921, Gertrude Bell, which was the British envoy in Iraq, wrote a letter to Churchill in 1921, 103 years ago. She said, we have to annex Kurdistan to Iraq. We need more Sunnis in Iraq, because if we establish Iraq without Kurdistan, a vast Shia majority will become a theocracy. So her prophecy was right. Unfortunately, it led to the annexation of Kurdistan unfairly to Iraq. But what I'm trying to say, we have a huge problem in Islam. Me as a Muslim, I speak with authority as a Muslim. You can get some very tolerant sightings from the Quran, from the surahs of the Quran, especially the early verses of the Quran, or you can get very intolerable or extreme sightings from the Quran. And depends who you are. If you are an Islamist, like or IRGC or Iranian henchman, you choose the extreme verses of Quran. And unfortunately, the Muslim societies was not able to resolve this huge problem. What I'm telling you, it's not even 9 years. Believe it or not, in the Shia edict in Najaf, it is allowed to marry even an infant, believe it or not, without full marriage procedure. I don't want to go into details until 9 years. And this is really beyond imagination and disgusting. It's only can be explained or described as legalizing pedophilia.
Right. I mean, why is this happening now? What kind of reactions are we hearing from the Iraqi public about this?
Well, because you have an Islamist with Islamist mentality. As I said, you can find verses in the Quran which give the Jewish people the right to go back to their Israel land. And you can find verses in the Quran who said every Jew should be killed. And it depends who you are and what to choose from the Quran. And unfortunately, this discrepancy has not been resolved. The same thing here. Those people use the extreme explanation of the Quran or al-Hadith, which is the talks of Prophet Muhammad, and their advantage. Iraq is buried in problems. We don't have schools. We don't have water. There's no wastewater. There's no transportation. There's no highways. There's no roads. The education system is in a terrible situation. You would think they would have more priorities as a parliament. But no, they put their sexual or sick sexual desire first, and put and also this is a way not to deal with essential problems and to divert the attention. And of course, the mullahs in Iran behind them supporting this mayhem.
What are members of the of the Iraqi public saying? What are members of the Iraqi public saying?
The vast majority, even the Shia themselves, the vast majority of the Shia, the silent majority against this rule. People in Iraq have much more problems to deal with than this completely secondary issue. But, you know, the Shia areas are suffering lack of all types of services because of this Iran proxy militias ruling. But those Iran proxy militias, as I said, they put their self-interest and sick sexual desire and pedophilia desires and on top of the interests of the country and the priority of the people.
All right, Entifad, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, giving us some of your insight here. We're going to be turning to a different story now. Afghanistan is considered one of the countries worst affected by climate change. In the last year alone, it's faced devastating floods and droughts that have destroyed much of its agriculture. Now, for the first time since the Taliban took over in 2021, an Afghan delegation is going to be attending high-level talks at the COP29 climate summit in Azerbaijan. We have more in this report from Emma Siegel.
An Afghan delegation will attend the COP29 UN Climate Change Summit in Azerbaijan for the first time since the Taliban came to power in 2021. Afghanistan is ranked as the 6th most vulnerable country to climate change. It faced devastating floods in May that killed hundreds and turned agricultural fields into swamplands, where 80% of people there depend on farming to survive.
This is the first time we have been invited since the return of the Islamic Emirate, and we are looking forward to this conference to discuss how Afghanistan has been affected and damaged in different international contexts.
This landmark decision for Baku to extend an invite comes after officials from Afghanistan's National Environmental Protection Agency have pushed to participate in climate summits, saying that political isolation shouldn't bar them from these talks.
Climate change is a humanitarian issue, and we have called on the international community not to associate climate change issues with politics, instead sticking to political considerations.
The COP29 Climate Summit will be among the highest-profile multilateral event attended by Taliban officials since they took control. Afghanistan is not formally recognized by any UN member state, largely due to the Taliban's restrictions on women's education and freedom of movement. While Baku reopened its embassy in Kabul earlier this year, it does not officially recognize the Taliban government, and the Afghan delegation will only be allowed to the climate summit as observers.
All right, we're almost done with today's show, but international travel to and from Israel is not going to be getting any easier. We have this update for you. The German airline group, Lufthansa, says that it's extending the suspension of its flights to Tel Aviv until December 15th because of the ongoing wars in Gaza and Lebanon. That means that flights are going to be canceled with Swiss Airlines, Austrian Airlines, and Eurowings. We're also going to be seeing the same with Virgin Atlantic Airways as well. They're going to be delaying the restart of their services to Israel indefinitely. All right, that's it for now for Middle East Now. We'll see you tomorrow.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I-24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Welcome to the Rundown on I24 News. I'm Benita Levine. Regular rocket fire out of Lebanon on this day. Hezbollah launching a spate of barrages at Israel's north. 165 rockets so far. 7 people injured, including a toddler. Shrapnel injuring 3 people in the Arab town of Beina. A direct rocket impact in Kiryat Atta during a massive barrage on the Haifa area. The terror group has been showing its support for Hamas in Gaza for more than 400 days now, since the day after the Hamas terror rampage and mass abduction in southern Israel on the 7th of October. Israel is now expanding its ground offensive in Lebanon to remove the threat of a Hezbollah invasion. It's working to push the elite Radwan forces away from the border so that tens of thousands of Israelis evacuated from their homes in the past year can safely go back home. Now, Israel's new Defense Minister, Yisrael Katz, has just wrapped up his first meeting with IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi. Katz saying there will be no ceasefire with Hezbollah until all the war goals are achieved. This coming after Israel's new Foreign Minister, Gideon Sa'ar, said there had been certain progress on a ceasefire in Lebanon. Hezbollah saying it hasn't received any official proposal, and it's reiterating it has enough weapons and supplies to fight a long war with Israel. More in this report by our Lynn Plachmeier.
The new Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, has declared the Lebanese terror group Hezbollah defeated.
We defeated Hezbollah, and the elimination of Nasrallah was the crowning achievement. Now it is our job to continue the pressure, and here we will work together to materialize the fruits of this victory by ensuring that the security situation in Lebanon has changed.
Despite Katz's claims, the IDF operation in Lebanon pushes on. On Sunday, the IDF released a video showing a network of tunnels, rooms and stored weapons underneath a cemetery, which it filled with concrete later. The IDF have been targeting Hezbollah fighters deeper into Lebanon, with the latest strike north of Beirut on the village of Al-Mat, which killed at least 23 people on Sunday. Despite Trump's promises to make an end to the war in Lebanon and Gaza, the Lebanese people are skeptical about his statements.
All the talk we hear in the press and the media. I checked with some of the responsible brothers, especially in the Lebanese state. I confided with them about some issues before this conference, so we know what to say regarding this, and they said that until now there is communications at the international level. Yes, we all heard about it in the media, but Lebanon has not received anything official or any specific proposals.
But Hezbollah is not the only group along Israel's northern border that is currently involved in the war. Overnight, the IDF downed 4 drones coming from Iraq, which was later claimed by the pro-Iranian militia, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. Meanwhile, Saudi media reported on Sunday that a Hezbollah commander responsible for the 2005 assassination of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri was killed in an alleged Israeli airstrike in Syria. Salim Yamil Ayash had a 10 million reward from Washington on his head and was a senior member of Hezbollah's Unit 151 assassination squad. And so, despite Katz's claims that Hezbollah has been defeated, the war in the north still remains active on many different fronts.
Many different fronts. So for more, we welcome to studio retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Neria, former Deputy Head of Assessment in the Israeli Military Intelligence and a former Foreign Policy Advisor to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here. There is much on the go, as is always the case during the war, but I want to start with the new Defense Minister Yisrael Katz. He's wrapping up his meeting with Herzi Halevi, the first since he's taken on this role. And he's talking, amongst other issues, about Iran, saying it is today more exposed than ever to damage to its nuclear facilities. And there is a possibility to achieve the most important goal, to thwart and remove the threat of annihilation over the state of Israel. But he does say, Jacques, there will be no ceasefire in Lebanon and there will be no pause until the war goals are achieved. What do you make of these words from the new Israeli Defense Minister?
The decision on the war in Lebanon will be made in Washington. certainly in Washington. It is already made in Washington by Donald Trump, who had lunch in a Lebanese restaurant and promised his Lebanese the audience that, who supported him and elected him as, helped him to be elected as the president, that he would help and stop the war in Lebanon. And this is the subject of discussion between him and Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. So this is where we stand today. So the decision is not with us, and certainly not with the Minister of Defense, who was just one day in his in office. And I think that he's just repeating what he heard in the session. I don't think that he has any capabilities of analyzing the situation and giving an input from himself. And the fact that he has declared that we have won the war, in fact, against Hezbollah, means a lot. For those who are looking from the outside and saying, what is he talking about? The 165 rockets fired by Hezbollah today, Hezbollah declaring that it has enough weapons to fight a long war several months. Even when the former Minister of Defense said that Hezbollah had only 20% of its equipment left, it's 40,000 rockets. It's 40,000 rockets and missiles and heavy missiles and long-range missiles. This is an arsenal that we cannot ignore. And the fact is that Hezbollah understands very well. This is maybe the most important point, that if we reach a settlement, a political settlement, according to which Hezbollah has to redeploy beyond the Litani River, it means for him the end of his role as defender of Lebanon. It means to him that he has to surrender his weapons to the army. He has to just eliminate his military units. This armada has to disappear, and this is what he understands, and this is why it's a fight for him. It's a fight of survival. If he wants to survive politically, he has to remain militarily very strong in Lebanon. Otherwise, he'll be eaten by the others.
And talk to us then, Ariel, about the role that Iran is playing right now. We're hearing what Yisrael Katz is saying about their defenses or lack thereof, given the latest developments in recent weeks. But what do you make of what could come out of Iran, and who is pulling the strings when it comes to those decisions Hezbollah could be making as we speak?
There's only one decision maker in Iran, that's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. But if we're looking at what Iran is saying vis-a-vis Lebanon and diplomatic efforts, so Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said this evening that Iran supports Lebanon in the full implementation of UN Resolution 1701. That means nothing, because UN Resolution 1701 is supposed to be fully implemented right now.
Right.
So basically what they're saying is we support the current situation. But what is being discussed among the diplomats, among the mediators, is what appears to be a viable deal for ceasefire with an Israeli withdrawal to the first line of along the border. The Lebanese military would dismantle Hezbollah terror infrastructure south of the Litani River. I don't see that happening, and so this puts a lot of questions on this deal. Basically, Iran invested millions, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in establishing terror infrastructure along southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River, and now they need to simply agree to hand that over to the Lebanese army and to dismantle that. So that, I think, is going to be one of the most challenging sticking points of this agreement. Obviously, the agreement says that Hezbollah will remove its forces south of the Litani River, and sources close to Hezbollah even acknowledged or accepted the terms of the deal, at least according to reports in Saudi media. What they did not agree to, and this will be the next major sticking point in any discussions of a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, is in the case of violations, will Israel retain the possibility to act against it? Hezbollah said they refuse that, but it raises the question, even north of the Litani River, Hezbollah can launch and does launch drones, missiles, rockets at Israel. So the question will remain, okay, they're not in the south of the Litani River, but Israel will still be in a reality where they just have to put their trust in the good faith of Hezbollah to not launch at Israel. They launched unprovoked fashion on October 8th, and so Israel will need very strong assurances, not only from the United States, the next Trump administration, but from the international community, that such violations will not happen, or that it maintains the ability to act against such violations when, and they will probably happen.
It's daydreaming. It's daydreaming. All those conditions that Israel has put on paper right now are unacceptable to the Lebanese, unacceptable to Hezbollah, and I don't think that there's a ground for any agreement. Now, Israel is running, on the one hand, sending Dremer to Russia in order to see if we can ask the Russians to be part of the mediation and part of the assurances on the security arrangements on the border between Lebanon and Syria, because according to the Israeli idea, we have to deploy forces along this border in order to prevent the flow of weapons from Iran through Syria to Lebanon. This is also unacceptable to the Lebanese. This is, we are just hitting the most precious thing of any country, sovereignty. And this is unacceptable to the Lebanese.
Certainly, many questions remain unanswered. We'll take a deeper look at all of those questions a little bit later on. Right now, I want to find out what is happening on the ground. Correspondent Zach Anders is in Kiryat Atta in northern Israel. And we know, Zach, a direct impact there in Kiryat Atta in the Haifa area. Several barrages today in total. 7 people injured in the north, including a toddler. So what update can you share right now?
All this happening not far from the direct impact that you see behind me. We've had to move down. The smoke is really overpowering. It's an acrid, horrible, horrible smell as what's inside that home continues to burn. What we do know at this point in the day, 190 different rockets, the IDF says, fired from Lebanon into northern Israel. Like you mentioned, 7 casualties. It's an interesting note when you look at comparing just yesterday. 45 rockets in total, the IDF says. That's a firm count. 6 casualties from yesterday from 45 rockets. Today, 7 casualties from 190. Really significant barrage into the Haifa area. Again, direct impact into this home here. What we know at this point about where things are progressing, I know we've just played clips of the new defense minister saying that Hezbollah has been defeated. Well, defeat looks a lot different on the ground. IDF ground forces and conversations I've had within the last few hours, they're still going at it, and they're still engaged heavily. IDF ground forces engaged heavily with Hezbollah on the ground in southern Lebanon. And the decision that is about to be made, whether or not to continue advancing, to hold the lines, or to withdraw, certainly a political decision. But with last night reports that the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, has approved plans for what would be an expanded ground operation, all things seem like they're in conflict right now, the messaging at least, knowing that this obviously is still going to continue. I'll just finish, Benita, with we're getting preliminary reports now of some 30 killed in a strike north of Beirut, another strike in Lebanon, working to collect more information, more details as to the exact surroundings of that strike.
And more updates to come from our correspondent Zach Anders in Kiryat Atta in northern Israel in the coming hours. For now, thank you very much, Zach Anders. Stay safe. Now, Arab and Muslim leaders convened in the Saudi capital, Riyadh, to hold a special summit on the ongoing wars in Gaza and Lebanon. Regional leaders calling on Israel to stop its, quote, aggression, with the Saudi Crown Prince accusing Israel of, quote, committing genocide in Gaza, further distancing Israeli hopes for a normalization agreement. Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran has the details in this report.
With ceasefire talks stalled, the IDF continues to deepen its ground operation in the Gaza Strip. In northern Gaza, the troops eliminated dozens of terrorists and dismantled terror infrastructure, including underground sites in Jabalia and Beit Lahia, the IDF said. In southern Gaza's Rafah, Israeli forces uncovered a weapons storage facility located near a mosque and a hospital. The IDF announced another expansion of the humanitarian area in an effort to mitigate the ongoing crisis in Gaza.
We are progressing with great intensity. The fact that you are concluding 3 weeks here with approximately 1,000 terrorists killed and 1,000 terrorists captured is a significant achievement that deals Hamas a severe blow.
With no end in sight to the fighting in Gaza and the war in Lebanon still ongoing, Arab and Muslim leaders convened in Saudi Arabia on Monday in a call to end the wars in the Middle East.
We demand the suspension of Israel's membership in the United Nations until it adheres to international law and ends its crimes against the Palestinian people. The Arab, Islamic, humanitarian, and moral duty requires us to show the highest levels of solidarity and to sever diplomatic ties with Israel rather than seek normalization.
The Saudi host, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, strongly condemned Israel and for the first time publicly accused it of committing genocide in Gaza.
We call on the international community to uphold its responsibility to maintain international peace and security by immediately ending the Israeli aggression against our brothers in Palestine and Lebanon.
Such statements further undermine Israeli hopes for normalization with Saudi Arabia, something that Riyadh says is off the table, at least until the war in Gaza is over.
And talking of Gaza, confirmation that an IDF officer was killed during fighting in the northern Gaza Strip earlier today. 34-year-old Major in the reserves, Itamar Levine Friedman from Eilat. He was a team commander in the elite Lotar anti-terror unit. This bringing the death toll in the IDF retaliatory ground operation in Gaza to 367. Retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Nourier, every time we hear of another soldier being killed in the fighting, the nation mourns. The cost is high, and the fighting continues in northern Gaza as we speak, 402 days into this war.
Well, the war will continue as long as our Prime Minister wants this war to continue, because Israel is not offering a substitute to Hamas. Israel is not proposing a political or even, a civilian body that would take care of Gaza and the Gazans. After all, we are talking about, let's say that, okay, we'll still have responsibility of military and security problems in Gaza, but what about the rest? Till now, Hamas is responsible of spreading all the humanitarian aid, and he's making money on that. Selling all the goods that are coming there. So there's a huge problem. And as long as we don't have a solution for this, then we will be just dragged into a guerrilla warfare where from time to time, unfortunately, we'll hear about soldiers who will get wounded, will get killed, and this is the way it will turn unless we decide that we will have to withdraw to certain areas and leave the rest, uncontrolled. And this is, of course, impossible to do. So we have to engage with the United States, with international bodies, and see how we can arrange in such a way that the management of Gaza will be taken care by somebody else. We don't want UNRWA. Okay, what other body do we want to see on the ground? Because we don't want to be responsible of 2.5 million Palestinians. This is too much.
And as we heard, Ariel, in your report, the summit in Riyadh, that draft resolution working to freeze Israel's participation in the UN, Muslim and Arab leaders making allegations against Israel at that summit. You talk about the day after, Jacques, when you look at what leaders there in Riyadh are saying, it doesn't augur well for any level of normalization down the line, even long term.
But Benita, this is the summit of hypocrisy. This is really hypocrisy. Has any of those Arab countries taken a step against Israel? Nothing. We have not seen anything of the sort from Bahrain, from the Emirates, from Egypt, from Jordan. They talk, okay, they condemn, but basically they hate Hamas. They hate Hezbollah. Hezbollah is there, is a subversive body that is creating instability in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in the Emirates, and all over the Arab world. Let us not forget. So there's something of declaration that, okay, this is a summit, everybody aligns to the right, and the right says, okay, we have to condemn Israel, we have to ask the United Nations to erase its membership. But this is, only talk. This is only talk and nothing concrete.
If it's only talk and not action, could there be a role for these nations in the day after? Could they be helping the Palestinians in Gaza, Ariel?
Well, I completely agree with Jacques' analysis. And if we're looking at what these countries have done on the ground, Egypt, their biggest step so far has been to close the Rafah border crossing and severely limiting the amount of humanitarian aid that goes into the Gaza Strip. All the responsibility falls on Israel. That's one thing. But specifically on what this summit and what the statements coming out of there, I agree it's mainly lip service because this is the second summit of its kind after a similar one happened in November of 2023. Nothing happened over there. But 2 points. One, I think the statements that we're hearing from the Saudi Crown Prince, none of these are statements that Saudi Arabia hasn't said formally, but to say it altogether in his voice does represent some sort of critical mass that shows where Saudi Arabia is standing right now in terms of its at least public willingness or openness to go to normalization with Israel, and the fact that the final resolution, final statement of this summit calls to work to freeze Israel's membership in the United Nations, something that I'm not even sure was talked about in reference to Russia after it invaded the Ukraine. I think this, if we see that there is actual work on this will be very concerning diplomatically, especially in the lame duck period of the current Biden administration. I think talk about now that Trump is expected to return to the White House and normalization is right around the corner, I think the goal of the Saudi Crown Prince was to show not so fast, the deal is still off the table, as long as daily images of death and destruction are still coming out of Gaza on every Arabic-speaking TV screen. The Saudi kingdom cannot allow itself publicly to move forward with normalization.
Fascinating to see how it all unfolds. We will keep watching. And talking of Donald Trump, he has confirmed he will nominate high-ranking Republican Elise Stefanik to be the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. The president-elect calling her an incredibly strong, tough and smart America First fighter. And she has confirmed she will accept the post, outlining how the historic landslide election has given hope to the American people and is a reminder that brighter days are ahead, both at home and abroad. Now, of course, she made waves globally for her efforts to tackle anti-Semitism on U.S. campuses, especially her tough questioning that led to the departure of the presidents of Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania, who battled to answer if they would condemn calls for genocide against Jews. We remember it all too well. So we now go live to senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim. He's at the Jewish Federation of North America General Assembly in Washington. So, Mike, let's start with Elise Stefanik making those headlines, not only with her questioning in those diabolical congressional hearings, but with the presidents of those elite institutions, but also for the way she slammed President Joe Biden's decision to pause that shipment of bombs to Israel. So talk us through the range of responses to this very important appointment.
She's firmly been on Israel's side and firmly has ingratiated herself to much of American Judaism, especially on the right, and the moderate American Judaism as well, for her efforts there in Congress. But above all, she has been a staunch critic of the United Nations, of its acceptance and almost kowtowing to anti-Israel sentiment within the body, anti-Western sentiment within the body, and essentially a turbocharged version of Nikki Haley is what we expect Elise Stefanik, currently the number 4 House Republican, to be. Danny Danon, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, put out a statement about an hour and a half ago praising the selection of Elise Stefanik. I'm sure they're going to work very well together there. We have yet to hear from the UN directly. I assume we will once that nomination becomes official, though Stefanik probably won't have to wait till Senate approval. Donald Trump has said he he wants his nominations to be approved in recess appointments, which means right off the bat, essentially, to take the Senate out of order to push through those nominations and get them started on day number 1. Keep in mind, not only is the Israeli-UN relationship very tenuous right now, but Donald Trump has been very critical of the UN itself. He's withdrawn funding for certain entities. He withdrew America from the UN Human Rights Council due to its anti-Israel bias, and the UN is very, very, very much on thin ice right now financially. I am sure Donald Trump will hang that over their heads coming up.
No doubt about that. Now, obviously, there are many challenges right now for the Jewish community. Horrific recent anti-Semitic incidents in Brooklyn, Washington, Chicago as well. You're at the General Assembly of the Jewish Federation, the first gathering as such since the presidential election. So what exactly is on the cards there?
The Jewish Federations in North America, together with the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations, held a rally here in Washington yesterday, sort of a precursor to the General Assembly. It was not anything like the rally on the National Mall a year ago, which in the aftermath of the October 7th massacre drew almost 300,000 people to the National Mall. Yesterday's rally only drew about 2,000 in a fairly empty baseball stadium. We can draw conclusions from that, but there seems to be more of a spirit today here at the General Assembly. There are sessions going on everything under the sun, covering American Judaism in Israel, from Israel advocacy to Judaism and humanitarian efforts to what comes next in terms of relationships on Capitol Hill and the White House. We heard from pollsters earlier today with a post-mortem of the recent elections. So just about everything being covered here over the next couple days. And the Israeli President Isaac Herzog, who has a meeting tomorrow with President Biden, he'll be appearing here later on today.
And our senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim will update on all those developments out of Washington as they happen. As always, thank you, Mike. And thank you again to our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran. Appreciate you being part of the rundown. Jacques, you're going to stay with us after the break. Right now, we're taking a very short break, but when we get back, our coverage continues on the rundown. We take a deeper look at developments in Europe, specifically the Netherlands and France, and the response to some of those developments on social media. Stay tuned.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at IsraelBonds.com.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Welcome back to The Rundown, turning our attention to Europe now, specifically the Netherlands and France. Israel raising its concerns about the low number of arrests after that brutal mob attack targeting Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam on Thursday night. At least 10 Israelis were wounded. Israel's new foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, saying the number of arrests over the apparently premeditated attacks by Muslim groups is very low. Local police saying on the weekend that only 4 of the more than 60 people detained remained in custody. Meanwhile, France isn't taking any chances, deploying more than 4,000 officers at the Stade de France for the France-Israel Nations League match on Thursday. So for more, we now welcome Chen Mazig, Senior Fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute. He joins us live now from London. Thank you, Chen, for your time. So Europe 2024, who could have imagined? There is so much outrage across the globe over that footage showing violent attacks on Israeli soccer fans after the Maccabi Tel Aviv-Ajax clash. Different narratives, of course, on social media. What kind of responses have you been seeing so far?
We've seen people justifying it, legitimizing it from our data research, this narrative that somehow the victims hold responsibility for the violence against them. We heard commentators in the UK, like Guardian columnist Owen Jones, justifying this violence and saying that those fans had it coming because they ripped a Palestinian flag or they chanted racist things. And somehow this warrants this disproportionate violence. And, you know, it's not new. We've seen it after October 7th. Commentators, specifically on the left, making this excuses for the violence against Jews, saying that somehow Israelis deserve to be violently ambushed. We've seen the videos, much like the Hamas terrorists on October 7th, the attackers in Amsterdam posted everything they've done. They were very proud of hitting and stabbing and ramming Jews. A few of them were calling it a Jew hunt. That's the term that the attackers used to describe it. They weren't looking for Israelis, they were looking for Jews. And we are commemorating Kristallnacht last week, the beginning of the Holocaust, the worst massacre of Jews in our history. And we are, instead of focusing on that and teaching people how not to repeat history, history is repeating itself in front of our eyes.
So difficult to process exactly that. And of course, that footage you are talking about out of Amsterdam was difficult to watch, and you could see exactly what was happening. So what concerns are you seeing on social media about preventing scenes like those we saw out of Amsterdam from happening again elsewhere in Europe?
Oh, we're seeing the complete opposite. We're seeing people cheering it. We're seeing people across Europe saying that what happened in Amsterdam is just is an example of what they need to do as well throughout Europe. The Israeli Security Council has announced that they are seeing a serious threat for Jews in the UK and in other major cities in Europe in the coming days. And all of it is a result of a dehumanization campaign and rhetoric that somehow, because football fans, soccer fans said something racist, they deserve to be attacked. You know, football fans anywhere are saying terrible things sometimes, but it was never okay to beat them up and stab them in the street. So this is going to be the pretext from now on in Europe, I believe. I think we're going to see in the coming weeks more and more violent attacks that are masqueraded as somehow fighting for Palestinian rights or Palestinian justice. Don't fight for justice of anyone by beating up and killing Jews in the streets. And it's terrifying to see it unraveling in Europe, that it should have learned the lessons of history. And I'm terrified for the future.
It certainly is terrifying indeed. As you say, some of the posts look like there's some kind of license to spew hate and vitriol, and of course people can do it anonymously as well. You talk about the rest of Europe. Obviously, eyes turn to France. We know security is being stepped up at Stade de France, and the elite unit of French police will escort the Israeli team. And President Emmanuel Macron will also be at the stadium watching. Tensions will obviously be high at the game. What is the build-up looking like in the cyber world ahead of this big clash?
It reminds me of the Eurovision and the time when Eden was the singer representing Israel, had to have so much security around her just to sing in Malmö in Sweden. And we're seeing the same thing happening in France. I don't know if I feel more safe about this, or I'm thinking to myself, why do we need so many police to participate in a sports event? Why does Israel and Israelis are subjugated to so much violence that we need so much defense? And I think a better way to address this violence for President Macron and other leaders across Europe is to take an unapologetic steps against it, and not to appease those Twitter and social media trolls and voices that are saying that somehow violence can be justified this time. You know, it's the same people that are saying that there's no justification for violence against Palestinians in the context of the war in Gaza, and now they found a way to justify it and contextualize violence against Israelis. There's never an excuse for violence, and I'm hoping that leaders around Europe will wake up, because it's not just about Jews. I want to remind them, every time in the history of Europe when Jews were the first to be attacked, the countries themselves collapsed, their economy collapsed, and it's going to happen to them if they don't stop it. So, you know what, if you don't want to care about Jews and you don't want to fight for us, fight for your own country and your own freedom, because this is what's at stake.
And fight for humanity as well. Chen, Maccabi Tel Aviv's next European game is at the end of the month. They take on Besiktas in Istanbul. What could possibly go wrong? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, in Turkey, we know the history of Erdogan and the comments that he made throughout this war. I do think that it's a dangerous time to go there, and I'm hopeful that the measures will be taken to secure the Israeli team. I don't feel comfortable knowing that Israeli fans will travel there, specifically Turkey. Other places in Europe, I think there's more hope, but I think it's a time for every Israeli and every Jew around the world to take their safety and security more seriously. What happened in Amsterdam and what happened in other places around America. I mean, we had a case just last week in New York of a Jewish kid almost being kidnapped from his family. We saw that. We saw violence erupted in major cities around Europe against Jews, specific attacks. We need to be more careful. We need to keep our safety. And it's sad that I'm here making a plea to Jews instead of the leaders that have failed us, have failed to ensure our safety and ensure that never again will not just be a slogan, it will be a promise that they uphold.
Incredibly sad state of affairs, as you're saying, across the region, across Europe, across the United States. So many questions. As you say, those leaders need to be accountable as well. Much to discuss. Always appreciate your insights. Chen Mazig, live from London. Thank you very much for being with us on The Rundown.
Thank you for having me.
Retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Nerier, this is just devastating. When you see the scope of what we're discussing, we're actually talking, to start, about sport, about soccer, about unity, about crowds supposedly cheering for matches, and this is what it has descended into.
And we were speaking about a Nova festival, about people dancing, right, enjoying life, and this is what going on. And this is where the result of hatred and the hatred deeply, I mean, anchored in ideology and in the way they look at Jews. Now, what's happening in Europe is not a surprise. It's the result of a long, years, decades of a long process of money invested by Saudis and by the Qataris in Europe, and funding Islamic and extremist organizations in Europe. And we see the radicalization among the Muslims in Europe in such a way that events like Daesh, the Islamic State, immediately reverberated in Europe, and European kids. I mean, the French Muslims and of Moroccan and Tunisian origin were the first to go and join the Daesh. So France itself has experienced a series of terrorist activities in the Bataclan, in Nice, against the synagogue in Toulouse, and it's not something new. We can really expect a flow or outflow of extremism in France, because I traveled, I took a taxi in Paris, and we began speaking, and I said to him, "Where are you from? Are you from North Africa, from Algeria, or from Tunisia?" He said, "No, I'm Muslim." I said, "But you were born here in France." He said, "Yes, but I'm a Muslim." So, the idea of pan-Islamism rather than nationalist, the idea of being, having a national identity is the one that prevails right now. And this is why we see a wave of Muslim identity going throughout Europe. It stops in, I would say, in the eastern part of Europe, where there are more Christian and more rightist regimes that stop that. And this is, and the regimes that have the professed tolerance to Islam are suffering today from that, and this is what the result. We've seen that in Holland, we've seen that in Sweden, and of course France and Britain. And imagine that in Alsace, a small county in France, you have more than 80 mosques. In Paris itself, in one of near the Pantheon, the sacred of the sacred inside Paris, you have a huge mosque being built by a Qatar and Saudi money. This is the reality of what we are living today.
A reality that is complicated, and something we were discussing earlier on the show. Many questions remain around exactly that, what leaders are saying, not what they are in fact doing. Jacques, stay with us. We've got more to discuss, because still 101 hostages remain in captivity in dire conditions in Gaza. Still no official clarity as to how many of them are alive. And winter is approaching, posing a new set of risks to the hostages held by Hamas for more than 400 days. So for more, we now welcome Yehonatan Saban, the spokesperson of the Resilience and Medical Team at the Hostages and Missing Families Forum, joining us from Bat Hefer. Thank you so much, Yehonatan, for your time. Winter is round the corner, yet another worry for the families of the hostages. And the hostages, of course, have already spent more than a year in unimaginable conditions. Immune systems compromised, no doubt, after all this time. Tell us more. What are the medical concerns right now?
Yeah, well, I think what you said is that the winter is the thing that worries us. It's most worrying thing that right now happening. It could be a death blow for the hostages. Unlike last winter, they are entering this one without any physiological reserves. I mean, they used all their body fat, their muscle mass has gone. All of that is weakening their ability to withstand the cold and putting them in serious risk for cold-related injuries, hypothermia, frostbites. In addition, they lack of vitamins and mineral. We know that they are suffering from malnutrition and starvation in captivity. So all of that is raising the likelihood of dangerous heart rhythm disturbances. And of course, their weakened immune system. They are more vulnerable to infections and viruses, all those winter diseases, flu, COVID, pneumonia.
It's just devastating, absolutely devastating. And to think, of course, as well, that the Red Cross never got to one hostage, the Red Cross. Jacques Naria, I bring you in on this exact point. It's unconscionable. We're talking about these dire conditions, hostages there for 400 days.
And yet the Red Cross didn't even meet them. Not even once. Didn't give a list of hostages. Didn't investigate how many of them are still alive, how many are sick, how many need medicine. And this is what's happening with the International Red Cross. Instead, I mean, can you imagine the other way around? The other way around, had we had this, and could we have prevented the Red Cross from receiving any information about prisoners? Impossible.
It just is literally sickening. And as we were discussing as well with Jonathan, not only physically would it be unconscionable, but for the hostages mentally to think of what they have been going through.
Imagine if they are kept in tunnels underground. I mean, humidity and cold and winter. You know, fungi would attack them, and certainly they will be I mean, a prey for sicknesses, and certainly, I mean, we will have to consider the fact that many of them would not survive.
It is just
sickening,
beyond heartbreaking, and absolutely sickening. And as we say, to think the humanitarian organizations, the medical crews, they just didn't get there. They just did not prioritize the hostages. Thank you so much to Yehonatan Saban, the spokesperson of the Resilience and Medical Team at the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. Thank you very much. Talk to me, Jacques, about what all of this means for the families of the hostages waiting for word right now. Realistically, we're talking about ceasefire deals, but realistically, what does this all mean for the families of the hostages?
The problem is that we don't know today who runs Gaza, who is responsible from Hamas. I mean, who is the counterpart to talk to? I mean, there are those who are in Qatar, who are now maybe about to leave Qatar for another capital. We don't know that. But the only thing that gives us hope is the fact that among those hostages, you have 8 American with I mean, double nationalities. They have they are American and Israelis, and the President Trump will invest on that and try to get the most of it in order to release at least, I mean, part of the hostages.
One can only hope, certainly hoping for some level of good news. Jacques, thank you so much. Stay with us because we're turning to a different chapter in our coverage, so to speak. Why is Amazon changing its policy once again over a book outlining testimonies from the October 7th terror rampage? Well, 23-year-old author Alon Penzel penned the best-selling book Testimonies Without Boundaries, Israel, October 7th, 2023. And back in June, Amazon banned the title for a 2-week period and then walked that decision back. Now, Amazon has taken issue with the advert for the book, saying it does not comply with its creative acceptance policies and includes content which is temporarily restricted due to quote-unquote current events. So for more, we now welcome author Alon Penzel joining us from London. So Alon, we've chatted before, the first time Amazon took issue with your book. Now, after reversing its initial decision to blacklist your work, it says the advert for your book does not comply with creative acceptance policies. It's been restricted due to current events. What exactly does that mean? What is going on?
Thank you for having me again. Unfortunately, we're here again because Amazon has decided to basically blacklist the advertisement now due to current events. What do current events mean? What has been violated right now? We don't know. We don't know what the reasoning is. Again, we were trying to get more information, to get some more elaborated and specified details of what the decision was about, but we never got them. And unfortunately, here we are again with the same situation. Luckily now that the book is still available, Testimonies Without Boundaries is available on Amazon, but they did not approve the advertisement, citing current events. What are current events? And in my opinion, having so many hostages in Gaza means that we need the advertisement and the book out in the world as much as possible. These are the current events that we should be referring to.
And how important it is right now for survivors, their testimonies that you are outlining in that book to be made public. It is so bizarre to think that the advert is now offensive. But when the book was first blacklisted and you were told the work had violated Amazon's company guidelines, did you ever get any further explanation about their concerns back then?
Never got any explanation, only changed their decision, probably due to press coverage, and we're trying to convince them to change their decision, and they did, but they never gave us any explanation as for why it had been blacklisted initially and why they decided to reverse their decision. And now they're coming up with another blacklisting now of the advertisement. And maybe this is the place to call upon everyone who's watching us right now. Maybe the swift revenge, that we can take is just make sure we get out the message in the book and the testimonies of the survivors and our heroes out in the world as much as possible. Get the book, distribute it, make sure your neighbors know it. It has to be found in every house around the world. And what I believe is happening, and they're trying to silence us, and we will not stay silent. We will speak up.
And Alon, I understand you're addressing the British Parliament and the House of Lords shortly. Tell us how that happened, and briefly, what will your message be?
So I did address the House of Lords, and I spoke to parliaments and lords, and it was important for me to convey the message that it is important to commemorate our brothers and sisters who were slaughtered on October 7th, and at the same time we have to remember that Israel will prevail and that we will overcome the tragedy that happened to us. Unfortunately, they killed many of us on October 7th. They murdered many of us. They took many of us hostage, but they were trying to also take our spirit away, break us. They will never do it. We'll stay strong. We are standing strong. I made sure that the parliament members and the lords understand that we're sitting here, in the very honorable place, but there are over 100 hostages who are currently being held in captive in Gaza, in tunnels, suffering every day, and we have to bring them back as soon as possible, and there is no time. And this is the message that I was conveying to them, as long as make sure that the testimonies are held, make sure that we fight worldwide denial and also anti-Semitism as a direct consequence of it. I was making sure they understand how important this mission is.
So important that you keep speaking out. Thank you so much. Live from London, Alon Penzel, author of Testimonies Without Boundaries, Israel, October 7th, 2023. Thank you very much for being with us on The Rundown.
Thank you, Israel Chai.
Thank you. And thank you as well, of course, as always, to Jacques Naria, retired colonel. Always appreciate your insights on the latest security developments. Thank you, Jacques. Now, for the past year, 3 brothers in southern Israel have been running a refreshment station for soldiers going in and out of Gaza. Our Nicole Zedek has the details.
All right. Again? Dan just came back from a second tour volunteering in Israel.
Now we're on camera now, huh? Yes, shalom. Volunteering all over the place. This is one of the must-do stops for volunteers.
Amen.
That's what all of the volunteers say at Shuva Brothers, a 24/7 refreshment stand near the Gaza Strip.
And then a guy who comes here every Monday and Wednesday. Lilian. She's like, I don't know,
80 years old.
She's coming with all their huge piles of homey-made food,
And imagine for the soldiers, their grandma just served them food in the middle of the war,
ושנה וחודשיים אחרי, אנחנו מ-7 לאוקטובר פה, כל יום. התחלנו בקפה, אנחנו נבוא גם בערב, ותמיד יהיה פה מלא, ותמיד פה מתנדבים, ותמיד בעשייה, ותמיד עם חיוך, ובאהבה. ויש פה את החנות הזאת, אפילו הגרביים שלי, מכאן. כל דבר, 24/7, כל מה שנצטרך.
13 months ago, this was nothing but the welcome sign to the tiny town of Shuva right near the Gaza border. Well, today, you can clearly see what they've done with the place. And more than 1,000 soldiers come right here every day to get 24/7 help.
This wall basically is the only concrete in the place. That's the only thing that was here. That's the entrance sign to Moshav Shuva. I'm saying that, for example, it's like someone will turn the Hollywood sign into a refreshment stop for hikers.
Something that all started as a way to help on October 7th, 2023.
After we heard the bombing, we realized this war going on. I started to thinking, okay, what can I do? I have no weapon, I'm not a soldier, but anything, who needs help? And that's how it all began.
Right outside of Kobe Trebelsi's town of Shuva, the army started treating wounded soldiers.
It was an actual field hospital in the junction. Okay, the army understand they cannot send more helicopters inside to the war zone because of an RPG threat. So they made this junction a field hospital. That's where they brought all the bodies. That's where they brought all the wounded.
So Kobe and his brothers, Dror and Eliran, set up a refreshment stand to help out.
We have the photos of this place as 2 tables. One table with some hot food and hot water, coffee, tea, The second table with some underwear, some deodorants, basic stuff.
But 2 picnic tables quickly expanded into a full operation.
So we kept thinking, how can we make the place better? nicer and give them the warm feeling and the great food and the hot food and the mamas to serve the food. It's not about the numbers of the soldier, it's about the numbers of the hearts that we feel with love.
Which is a lot of full bellies and happy hearts.
Until today, that we know that we already fed
And that
more.
is a wrap for this edition of The Rundown. I'm Benita Levine, live in Tel Aviv. Thank you for watching. This is I-24 News.